To get 3 Disney books for just $2 and a free chair, write to Disney Books Offer, Box 1000, 444 Robson Street, or call 685-2055. That's 685-2055. Don't forget to name the famous mouse and get 3 Disney books for just $2.
BCTV, our best show.
Good morning. The man you're going to meet this morning is 44, fluently bilingual, married, 3 kids, son of an electrical worker, good working class roots, resigned yesterday as president of the Iron Ore Company of Canada. He wants to beat Joe Clark and he wants to be prime minister, and he's finally made up his mind. Let's go back a little bit.
Choosing Joe Clark as leader, I believe the Conservative Party chose wisely and chose well. Take a hard look at it if the leadership of the party came open in an honorable and legitimate way.
You have no intentions of ever challenging him for the leadership of the party, sir?
I'm not a challenger.
Great speech.
Mr. Clark's reconfirmation as leader of this party is an important part of this process, and his subsequent re-election as prime minister will be good for Canada. I'm going to run a frugal and a thoughtful and a delegate-oriented campaign.
Is that definite? You are now in the ring, you've changed your mind completely, you're going to tackle Joe Clark for the leadership, beat him and become Prime Minister of Canada?
You know, Jack, as some people get older, they get a little more gentle, and I'm delighted to see it hasn't happened to you.
I have this morning, of course. I have a touch of tenderness in me, thinking of your policy statements yesterday. We'll see how Mr. Mulroney tackles up on his policy statements, see if we can get him to bash the libs and explain the fight within the Conservative Party after the break.
What we need is new leadership and new vision and a new articulation of a sense of purpose. And with that, we can win and win a genuine majority government representing French and English, East and West, and bring this country of ours together as never before.
Brian Mulroney is truly just a citizen of Canada. He has never, ever held elected office. He's probably confident, as we'll see this morning, that he is going to defeat Joe Clark in Ottawa in June. Let's presume for a moment that you win the leadership in a nice, friendly battle with no great backstabbing. Will you then sit in the public galleries for up to 19 months before you become an effective elected leader of the party?
Now, what will happen, Jack, when I'm elected leader is that the same thing that happened in Mr. Stanfield's case, in the sense that one of the members of Parliament presently sitting there has already indicated that he would step aside and offer me the opportunity of entering the House immediately.
In other words, you would create, your friend would step down and create an instant by-election for you.
That's right, and we'd go into the House and be there on the 1st of September to begin the process of ridding this country of probably the worst government in recorded history.
Would that seat be the one presently held by the one Tory MP from Quebec, Roche Lassalle?
It could be one of a number.
Oh, it'd have to be Quebec.
One of a number.
Isn't Quebec your flagship?
It is indeed, but with only one member there, we would have to weigh together the value of diminishing our strength.
Very blunt question. How many seats, and you've polled this well, even in your frugal so-called campaign, how many seats can Mulroney win in Quebec to make him really attractive to the West?
I'll tell you exactly how many.
The day after?
No, sir. I'll tell you today. I'll win just enough seats to form a genuine, national, progressive, conservative majority government. And let me tell you something, Jack.
You mean across the country or in Quebec?
Across the country, there will be enough seats from French Canada to join with the seats from British Columbia and elsewhere to form a majority progressive conservative government.
Are you telling me Ontario does not matter if you're the leader of the party?
Oh, no, I didn't say that. Indeed, it matters.
But you said you could, with Quebec, Alberta, British Columbia, majority government.
Well, what I meant, of course, was Ontario as well.
Are you confident now that Brampton Billy, who is presently shimmying on the sidelines, will stay out?
No, you know, Mr. Davis is an outstanding leader of the party, and he has lots of time in which to make up his mind, and he's, I'm sure, reflecting upon it.
But it's not right that he should, is it?
Well, sure, he's
I mean, is he not the man who got right into bed with Trudeau and sabotaged the last efforts of the Conservative Party?
No, you have to look at this from his perspective. He's the Prime Minister of Ontario, and in trying to serve his constituents, there are conflicts that develop with somewhat of a national perspective from time to time. And it's true of any premier, or it's true of any regional candidate. One has to harmonize the interests of divergent groups to try and bring a better position for Canada.
Now, you have all the qualifications now. You've got your working class background, of which you are inordinately proud.
Properly proud.
Properly proud. You're totally and absolutely bilingual.
Yes.
But when they bring Turner out of the closet, he too is the perfect candidate. He can beat you in the West.
Oh, no, he can't. I'll tell you this, Jack. It's going to take more than a cosmetic change at the last minute by the Liberal Party to change the thinking of this country. I don't want to talk about Mr. Turner or Mr. MacDonald or anyone in particular, but let me tell you this. The damage and the sadness that have been inflicted on the Canadian people by the actions of the Liberal government for the last 15 years are so substantial that it's going to take infinitely more than a cosmetic little change and a little typical Liberal shuffle at the last minute. One of their, as they're called in Quebec, a stunt. You know, one of the great stunts the Liberals are capable of. It's going to take infinitely more than that to change the minds of the Canadian people about a government which has absolutely devastated this country.
Can any government, even under, if you are the leader, can any government bring this country up off its knees again with world trade as it is, Canadian productivity as it is, and the fact that we are Mandarin-ridden and bureaucratized to death?
You've just touched, Jack, and I thank you for it.
But I want you to expand on it. How badly is the Mandarin control, the bureaucratization? How bad is the Liberal government specifically?
Well, let's just take perhaps two areas. When Mr. Trudeau came to office, in 1968, the deficit was in the neighborhood of substantially under $1 billion. You know what it is today. When he came to power in 1968, we were committing 1.4% of GNP towards research and development. Mm-hmm. We've now dropped to 1.13%, where we should have been doubling our commitment over that period to research and development, because every percentage point of GNP affected towards research and development creates 1 million new jobs. The youth of this country, an entire generation, has lost out on one of the most golden of opportunities in that area. Take productivity. This country, in terms of productivity, and it's the only thing that we live on, the only thing that creates real wealth is an increase in our productive capacity. What has happened is that we have dropped from number 2 position of the OECD down to almost the bare bottom of the OECD countries. So what you've had is a mismanaged economy in all the fundamental areas, and the wreckage in human terms is there for everybody to see. These are fundamental problems that I've been speaking out. In fact, I spoke on here in Vancouver less than a year ago on some of these areas, and they must be addressed in a bit. I think that it's not necessarily, we all have negatives in this thing. It's true, for example, I'm not a member of Parliament.
Big weakness in your campaign.
It's a negative. Grant Devine, for example, had never sat in the House when he became Premier of Saskatchewan, and look at the good job that he has done. But you know, we have to be weighed on our negatives and our positives. It's true that I'm not a member, and that is a negative, but I do bring a substantial understanding of business, having taken a company from a large company, from a pretty bad situation into a pretty enviable one. The role of civilizing labor relations, which is so vital, I have a vast background in that. All of these are positives, and we'll have to weigh both.
It all sounds wonderful, but to the man in the street in British Columbia, the person in the street, do forgive me, With 220,000 people drawing unemployment insurance, 1 in 4 or 5 people in this province is on government support of some kind. Don't give me GNP. What would you do tomorrow? Would you go into massive deficit spending on public works to create instant jobs?
Can't be any more massive than it already is. The size of the deficit is unprecedented, and it's impacting negatively and directly on other important economic indicators. There's only one way.
What's that?
They're not a half a dozen. There's only one way. This is a private sector free enterprise economy. And that's the motor of the economy, and what we've got to do is put gas in the motor, rev her up, applaud the driver, wish him well, and that is the only way. Private enterprise in the private sector where you're going to create new wealth and new opportunities in this country.
Peter Pocklington has been listening to you. Tax breaks for corporations.
I didn't.
No, you've got to give tax breaks for corporations.
That's one of the areas. I'm talking about the small and medium businessman, where 60% of the jobs as well are created in this country today.
But to get the wealth, are you going to break
You've got to get the government off the backs of the only creative people in terms of creation of job opportunities and wealth, which is the private sector. The private sector must be treated with respect and encouragement as opposed to being treated as they are now by the government in Ottawa.
I'm looking for a headline. More tax breaks for the small businessman.
Encouragement, very strenuous fiscal encouragement.
Sell Petrocan back to private industry.
Well, I think Petrocan has a role, a more modest role than it has now, but it has a role in Canada.
Petrocan after tax, tax breaks for married couples. What did you think of lovely Judy Arola when she said that married women who were childless didn't contribute anything and should lose perhaps their tax exemption? Would that be your attitude?
Well, I think that in retrospect, Judy, Mrs. Arola would have wished that she had not said that. It was not one of her more brilliant statements.
Could you break the impasse between the federal government on its NEP and Mr. Lougheed, who doesn't want to give up a nickel of what taxation he's getting on the NEP?
Well, the NEP itself is a symbol of what we've been talking about.
Scrap it?
The NEP, Jack, was bad for a number of reasons. First of all, it contained confiscatory provisions. It changed the rules of the game for the international investment community after the game had begun. It had some dimensions about it that were respectable, but the manner in which it was done was unacceptable and has hurt Canada a great deal. I think that Peter Lougheed is a reasonable guy, and I think that we can work out a deal in the best interests of Alberta and the best interests of Canada.
Isn't it crazy as the world oil price goes down to less than the 75% level that our gas prices are going up? Could you, if you were Prime Minister, stop this nonsense?
Well, there's only so much that the Prime Minister of Canada can do, but civilizing our relations as well with the government of the United States, where natural gas exports are so important, is a top priority.
What do you mean by that? We're presently selling natural gas at $4.98 US, and they won't buy it. What would you do to the price of surplus natural gas in British Columbia?
I think what you're having, Jack, with regard to natural gas or acid rain or a dozen other areas, what you're having is the result of a lack of civility that should exist between the United States of America and Canada, namely our greatest friend, our closest ally. We have to remove the irritants of the Trudeau government attitude. He deals with the government of the United States in much the same way as he deals with the government of British Columbia or with you. He genuinely doesn't seem to care very much unless he gets his own way.
You're not suggesting he's arrogant, are you?
I wouldn't go that far, Jack. Everyone knows that he's a meek and mild and thoughtful young man.
More with Brian Mulroney after Joe Clark's job, in the nicest way, eh? After the break. Before I get down to the heavy stuff that you want to talk about and all the rest of it, let me try you on a couple of issues. Trudeau is very chilly about the monarchy. Very chilly. You can take it or leave it. He said so on this program. How do you feel about the monarchy to we kind of somewhat hysterical Westerners who turn out and give the Queen standing ovations by the hundreds of thousands?
As indeed you should.
Are you a monarchist?
I am someone who is respectful of an elegant and thoughtful tradition in this country. which has served Canada very well. I think that the Queen is a marvelous person and a great example for our country and for the youth of our country, and I think that she has contributed a great deal.
You welcome the Queen of Canada, and she should stay as such.
I do indeed.
All right, next question. These are my redneck questions, because after all, you are from Quebec, and
That's
you
right.
are an Easterner, and you're not yet fully accepted in the West. What about capital punishment?
Well, capital punishment is a real tough one. I, in 1975, said that it should be a 25-year mandatory non-reviewable sentence for a capital offense, and I still feel that way because there is no evidence that the deterrent factor sustains the other view. In fact,
Does that mean you're against capital punishment?
I am against capital punishment, Jack, but it's the kind of issue where it must come now to a free and an unfettered vote in the House of Commons because it is so sensitive and it captivates the interest of the Canadian people in such a compelling way.
If there were a demand in the House of Commons and you were in control, you would recommend a free vote of the House and abide by the decision of the House?
Yes, I would.
We have a problem in Vancouver which Eastern politicians do not understand. You have it in spades in Montreal, but we're still a small town. I'm talking about hookers, pestiferous behavior on the streets by hookers and customers. Ottawa doesn't have the problem. Would you amend the criminal code to bring about simple soliciting as an offense to clear the streets of big cities, especially this one, of the pest of molestation on the streets?
Well, I think that and a series of other problems in this general area should be subjected immediately to a tripartite review by the Justice Committee of the House of Commons for recommendation to the Minister of Justice.
Come now, Mr. Mulroney. We've had tripartite review. We've got a Minister of Justice now, McGuigan, who wouldn't know Georgia Street if he saw it.
That's right.
We've got all kinds of people like Sven Robinson of the NDP who really want red light districts. Yeah. All we're asking for, unanimous from almost everybody here, is a simple amendment to the criminal code to make simple soliciting an offense under the code. Now, what's wrong with that?
Well, look, you run into the question of unfortunately, I say unfortunately, you run into the question of civil liberties, which are important. You run into, Jack, I remember when Mayor Drapeau passed a bylaw in the city of Montreal.
We don't want bylaws.
No, but he passed, for example, a bylaw to prevent mingling of this kind in restaurants and public places. And it was greeted by the citizens with a lot of enthusiasm and then struck down by the courts. You know, we live in a society, laws where your rights, you know, I hate to say this to you so early in the morning, but your rights are no more important than those of a hooker in terms of civil liberties.
Providing I'm not breaking the law.
That's right. That's right. So I think within that parameter, we have to conduct our society in an orderly, considerate way, but we have to remember that it is a rule, a society
You're doing
of
a
laws.
Joe Clark on me, Mr. Mulroney. You're going to refer it to a tripartite committee.
No, I'm giving you the straight goods, and as would Joe.
He would refer it to a committee, too.
No, he would give you the straight goods.
No, he'd refer it to another tripartite committee. Now let's get back to the problem of Joe Clark himself. I'm going to say to you, what's wrong with Joe? You won't answer that. I'll ask you this one. Why is Mulroney, with no political experience, a better leader of the Conservative Party than a man who spent his life in it since he was an office boy for Dividend? What makes you better than Joe Clark if I'm a delegate to the convention?
I didn't say that I'm better than anyone. I say that I bring...
Yes, you do.
I say, no.
You're going for the leader. You
That's
must
right.
think you're better than anyone.
Well, that's a difference. I didn't say it. You said it.
But you think it.
Well, all right. Now we understand one another.
Right.
Okay. And there's a subtle but important difference there.
Modesty is a subtle but important distance.
Voila.
A touch of tenderness.
As they say. Jack, the best conservative ideas, the best policies in the world. For example, let's deal with something that's right on your
doorstep.
Your doorstep. The concept of Western alienation. If I were a British Columbian, the ultimate in alienation, as far as I'm concerned, would be on election night when I turned on the tube and realized that this matter had all been decided back east a couple of hours earlier. You don't count, right?
We don't matter.
So we're not out here, we're not in the decision-making process. What I'm saying to the Conservative Party and to Western Canada is this. That is the ultimate indignity. Now, how do we cure it?
Quite simple.
All right. After I give my views, maybe you can give yours.
I'm just prodding you to give me the
All
answer.
Right. The answer is this, that in the 1980 election, there are 102, and this is interesting because the cure to Western alienation, strangely enough, comes through the following process. There are 102 seats in this country with a francophone component in excess of 10%. In the 1980 election, the Liberals won 100 of those seats and we won 2, which meant that they, on the day the writ was issued, we took 100 seats, we wrapped them up in a red box, and we brought them to Mr. Trudeau and we said, Mr. Trudeau, here's our gift to you. And by the way, if you can find another 9, 10, or 11 somewhere else, you've got yourself a minority government. What I'm saying is that I'm going to take that back. And I'm going to say to Mr. Trudeau or the next leader of the Liberal Party, you want one of those seats, you're going to fight for them. As a result of which, we will get our share and the Liberals can have their share, which means that when you open your tube on election night in British Columbia, that thing is not over. It's going to be decided on Vancouver Island or elsewhere, which is the way it should be. And this is the way we bring West and East together, because the ultimate indignity is the exclusion from the supreme decision-making process, namely the formation of a government itself.
That's only because of their stranglehold on Quebec.
Not only their stranglehold in Quebec. There are 75 seats in Quebec. But there are 27 others elsewhere, from Northern Ontario through Eastern Ontario, Northern New Brunswick, and so on, which give them this incredible stranglehold on the government. And I'm saying to Western Canadians and to British Columbians, I understand the frustration. If I were a British Columbian, I'd feel exactly the same way. But the only way to cure it is not necessarily to rail against it anymore, to consider the possibility of electing someone who is going to go and take that present back and say, Mr. Trudeau, we're not giving you and your party any more presents. You're going to fight for everything you're going to get, and on election night, this will be decided in British Columbia.
In other words, you're telling me that you can cure alienation by the simple but effective matter of forming a national government based in Quebec and the West. Is that right?
I will form a national government with representation from all regions of Canada, and the next government will be decided when you turn your tube on election night in British Columbia, because we will not have given away 100 seats the day the writ was issued.
But I've one other little corollary which you might well consider, because I anchored the CTV network the last time round, and I sat here saying to the East, we don't matter, we don't matter. You could simply change the times of voting so the polls closed at the same time all across the country, and then even that would make us leave less alienated.
But wouldn't it be better, Jack, if coming into BC when you turned on the tube, the Conservatives were either tied? Wouldn't you like to see that? The Tories tied with the rest of them, and all of a sudden it'd be decided here so that British Columbians say, hey, we're the ones who formed this government. We have direct impact on the policies of this government, and we feel at home with that guy Mulroney, because he went ahead and broke the stranglehold that the Liberal Party has on the national government via those 100 seats.
Even if you do break the stranglehold, you've got to recognize that the West exists.
Indeed I do.
National energy policy, classic example.
Precisely, and that's why I'm here today. My first stop after I announced, the first thing that I did after I announced my candidacy in Ottawa was get on a plane and come to Vancouver, and that's why I'm here today.
You traveled first class, of course.
I traveled economy, Jack, just like you.
It's somebody else is paying, I don't. Is that not a little bit gauche to travel economy as a PR gesture?
No.
Gauche. Good French word?
Good, very good French, but good French, but bad thought. It's appropriate in the circumstances that I travel that way, because I'm running a frugal campaign and it has to be like that.
How much? $500,000?
Pardon?
$500,000?
I see those figures floating around by other candidates. I think that's a little high.
Crosby, $500,000. You'll go for $300,000.
I think $500,000 is a little high.
$350,000.
How much are you going to give me?
Nothing.
I got a checkbook here.
$350,000.
That's a fair figure.
Are you going to disclose your sources of contribution?
I'm going to do this time exactly what I did the last time. Follow the rules of the game as they were promulgated and which I agreed to and signed.
That doesn't mean the disclosure of results.
I will do exactly what the party requires.
Whatever.
Whatever.
More with Brian Mulroney. They said he'd charm me out of my socks. I'm not quite sure yet. After the breaks. As we all know from living in British Columbia and from people like Adam Zimmerman, the mining industry is in a near disaster scenario at the moment, correct?
That's right.
You started out receiving some very bad publicity. Let's look at it in detail. I'm reading from the Vancouver Sun, November 5th, 1982. The Iron Ore Company, of which you were president until yesterday, corporate shareholders received $250 million in dividends in the 3 years before they shut down their operation in Shefferville, paid out $40 million more than it made to its 5 U.S. and 2 Toronto-based owners. You went and faced them, but you've got some very bad vibes in this. The tough president of the Iron Ore Company giving out massive dividends and then going up to piece off the workers. How do you defend yourself on that one?
Well, I think that
in this labor-conscious province.
I think that if you the way you defend it, Jack, is to tell the whole story. In Shefferville, we were affected by a combination of competition from the rich Brazilian ores and the depressed conditions in the steel industry. We were hemorrhaging up there, and so we had to take a decision which affected 165 permanent employees and some 400 temporary ones. In that regard, I put together a compensation package in an amount of $10 million, which is the most generous, is certified as the most generous in the history of Canadian industry, which involved severance payments, which averaged $17,000 per person, moving allowances. We gave the employees their own homes. We maintained all of the fringe benefits for a number of years, early retirements, and so on. It's been so qualified by the government of Quebec and others as the most generous severance package in the history of Canadian industry. Having said that, I then went up to Shefferville, explained to our employees, we initiated a program for the economic redevelopment of that small community, which is presently in the process of working. And I explained it before 19 cabinet ministers and members of Parliament of the Quebec National Assembly in Shefferville, where the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Manpower of the Government of Quebec agreed, as did the steelworkers, with the generous and appropriate approach that we took. There are no easy decisions.
This was beyond the needs of the contract.
These are over and above the requirements of collective agreements, over and above requirements of provincial government legislation. You know, there are no easy decisions anymore, as Adam Zimmerman told you, certainly not in the mining business. But when you take the decision, you have to remember the human dimension. The employee has to be paramount in the manner in which you go about layoffs or decisions.
And you would recommend all big corporations on close downs should do as much as they could, like you did?
Very much so.
Mm-hmm. Well, is Shefferville closed for the foreseeable future?
Shefferville is still alive, and we have the economic redevelopment program going on now, which holds out the promise of new and diversified opportunities. A new industrial vocation for Shefferville, different from the last one, which is a large industrial employer, but we have a considerable hope for the future of Shefferville.
Let's get back to the Tory convention. Now, you presumably will, what are your principal planks in a Mulroney platform? Just very simply, you've told me about possible tax breaks. You've told me you want the private sector to be the spearhead.
That's right.
What would you do with index pensions and patronage? Would you just, are you waiting your turn, said he brutally, to get into that pork barrel to do what the Liberals do each and every day?
Well, I think that one of the, you mentioned index pensions, I think that one of the problems that the government has in dealing with ordinary Canadians, be they unionized or anything else, is that the senior civil servants, for example, and the Prime Minister himself don't have clean hands on this issue. No one else has a similar pension scheme in Canada. If they want to index pensions, let them index it to real growth in the GNP. Would
you change it?
Oh, indeed. I plan to change it as soon as the Conservative government is sworn in. Indexation not for the widows and the families, because they had nothing to do with the cause of inflation. I'm talking about setting an example for the nation in that regard.
And some of the monies that people like Jack Austin will get over the life of their Senate seat are really quite repulsive.
Well,
are they not?
The patronage of the Liberal Party is absolutely staggering. The manner in which they treat the public's money as if it were their own private trough. They have no sensitivity to what they do, be it from appointments to the CNR or to Air Canada or to the Senate. This is a boondoggle. And what they're saying is, all right, we're here, now let's all get right in the trough. We'll put our 2 feet right in this trough now, and we're going to have the biggest picnic that we can. And if the Canadians, because of those 100 seats that we talked about earlier, they'll give us another kick at the can. They've been doing it all their lives. I'm saying it's all over. If we address this in a serious and fundamental way, it's all over, and I'm going to do something, Jack, I want to do something unusual for this country. I want to make honest people out of the grits. I want them to know what it's like to work and to meet a payroll and to pay a mortgage and not to have all of these benefits and these automatic entrees across into the government of Canada. I want them to be like the rest of the people. We're going to make honest people of them. That's a big challenge now. I don't mean honest in the sense of anything other than the problems that you and I confront on a daily basis.
All right, when Jean Piggott was in on your party's last-lived short-term government, Jean opened the books in Patronage so that people knew who was getting paid and for what. The Liberals closed it. Would you open them again?
Well, I think that it all should be on the public record.
On government appointments?
Indeed, it should be all open to public scrutiny.
You would not go after the old age pensioners, but you would restrict indexation, and you may lose civil service votes on this, to the real gross national product, GNP.
Yes, I think that civil servants would be and we have, in many ways, an excellent public service in
What
Canada.
do you think?
And I think they would be the first to realize that their positions are jeopardized as public servants when they have privileges and benefits that the ordinary Canadian can never hope to have. Jack, I'll give you an idea of how far this has gone. In the province of Quebec, for example, a guy by the name of Gilles Barry, a PQ member of Parliament, was elected. And if he gets elected again, he will have served for 5 years. Okay? That's the pension requirements. He gets a fully indexed pension. At the end of 5 years, he then leaves and begins 2 terms and the equivalent of 5 years. He then retires, and he draws this index pension for life, right? He will have reached, at that point in time, the ripe old age of 26. That is exactly...
I know, but it's comic opera.
It's so preposterous that in an ordinary society, you know, they'd probably take us out in the public square and do something with us in that regard. That is how far this notion of indexation has gone in the Canadian public service.
Without involving you too deeply in the Gillespie-Lalonde affair, give me your succinct opinion on their ethical guidelines for doing business with your old government.
Well, all I can do is refer you to a conflict of interest statement that I prepared and which is binding upon all managers and employees of the Iron Ore Company of Canada. And it is strict, and it is tough, and it is stringent, which precludes conflicts of interest of any kind, and that is the manner in which I would conduct myself in Ottawa.
Absolutely. Chop people off at the pass when they've left government and not allow them to do business?
Particularly with this old boy network that the Liberals have going, the game of musical chairs where they're in one day and out the next, and let's look after the boys at all times.
More with Brian Mulroney after the break. Surely it can be said of you, Brian Mulroney, that you did chicken out in the Quebec by-election. You could have run in that by-election and gone for your seat before now.
Wrong again, Jack. Mr. LaSalle wanted his seat back, and it was felt by all of us, including his constituency association, that having served there 13 years, he should go back and reclaim it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll let you off the hook on that one. What about Levesque? Is he down the tube as far as national politics is concerned? We in the West never think now of any separation problems. Are we wrong? Are we shielding our eyes by the Rocky Mountains?
No, I think that as the economic difficulties in Quebec increase, that the option of independence is becoming less and less attractive. But people should learn never to underestimate Mr. Levesque. He is a remarkable communicator. He inspires great trust still in the province of Quebec.
Despite the teacher's caper?
Despite the teacher's caper, he's still an eminently popular fellow, and it's too early to say.
A couple of things I want to clean up. One of the great alienations here is that we in the West, generally speaking, were quite sure that not a soul the other side of the Great Lakes knew anything about our lumber problems until the Americans put the needle in. Am I not correct in that? That there is a vast lack of interest in the lumber and mining problems in Western Canada from where you sit?
Well, you know, for example, on that 12% tariff matter, the forestry ministers of Quebec and Ontario, you know, were down there working with BC. I thought that received a great deal of attention, as it should, because of the importance of the...
That's what we were afraid of. The
yeah.
DREE grants going in Eastern Canada made the hair of the Americans stand up on the back of their necks.
Well,
subsidy.
it's true, but I think all Canadians viewed that with great sympathy, and BC got a fair amount of support. In fact, an impressive amount of support, as it should have.
We're not out of the woods yet.
Not out of the woods yet. And when I see, for example, what Cal Knutson has to do, selling his head office building to use the cash to stay alive, there's an indication of how serious matters are. But you know, you mentioned the mining industry. BC mining industry is in desperate shape, as it is across the country. What does the federal government do? It imposes taxes on fringe benefits that go to employees, for example, extended vacations, travel subsidies, interest mortgage subsidies that we need to attract people into northern BC and northern Labrador and so on, rather than say, hey, this is a particularly difficult time, we're going to give the companies a bit of a break and the employees a bit of a break. They don't do that, and they impose an extra burden on us. What I think should happen is we should take a couple of fellows from northern BC, send them down to Ottawa and get them to write the tax rules for the next budget, and get some of the civil servants to come out here and see how much they'd like it. Send them to Labrador. They wouldn't like it one bit, and we'd have a better budget.
Well, your general thrust actually is that you're going to cut down government involvement. You would pull back the influence and the statutes on Petrocan, would you not?
Yeah, although the main thing is that we have to increase our productivity. We've got to double our commitment to research and development. We've got to free up the motor of our economic development, which is the private sector. We've got to civilize our labor relations in Canada, and we've got to adopt a better posture with our greatest friend and our greatest client, and namely the United States of America.
And you've got to loosen up FIRA quite considerably, is that correct?
Put her on the back burner.
Altogether?
Put her on the back burner in the sense that there's a role for a FIRA in Canada, but the words FIRA have become a symbol of hostility on the international money markets. And what concerns me now is about convincing the guy to put up some cash to build a factory in British Columbia, and not who owns the cash. What matters now are jobs for Canadians, and we've got 1.7 million Canadians telling us we have to do that.
You call yourself a Tory with dimensions of tenderness. Put a color on it, please. We regard Joe as a nice left-wing Tory who's not going to upset any of the transfer payments. You know John Gamble. I don't even know who he is. We may see him before the end of the month. What kind of Tory are you? Are you a middle-of-the-road, light blue Tory?
I'm a moderate, pragmatic man who has realized that, on the one hand, governments have no money. It's our money. The government of Ottawa hasn't got a nickel. It all comes from the people of British Columbia and from people across Canada. So I'm a fiscal conservative in that regard, but I realize that the role of government as well, once it takes part of our cash, is to look after those who are unable to care for themselves. And that's where you would call me, without hesitation, a compassionate, caring conservative on the social side.
And we can afford the safety nets of UIC, etc., unlimitedly?
No.
Don't have to cut back on them?
No, we can't afford safety nets. Yeah. But I don't, you know, what was good in the past is not necessarily good in the future, and we have to take a look at it with regard to doing the most we can for those who need the money most, irrespective of the manner in which it's been done in the past.
Sounds wonderful.
Using your dollars and mine. Now, I know that you're not a frugal guy.
No,
I know you're not a frugal guy.
In favor of motherhood, Mr.
I want to
Mulroney.
use your money in the most productive way possible.
All right. Now, I almost forgot something very important. Are you a hawk or a dove on international affairs? Because you might be Prime Minister of Canada. What are you?
I'm a thoughtful guy who's concerned about our role.
Are you in favor of cruise missile testing on Canadian territory?
Well, I'm in favor of doing what is consistent with our NATO and NORAD obligations. But let me tell you something. We've already had one Minister of External Affairs repudiated by Trudeau in the House of Commons on this issue. It's going to be just a little while before he repudiates another Minister of External Affairs, and I'm not buying a pig in a poke from the Grits on anything. On the cruise, they can bring forward a piece of paper that spells out our contractual obligations, and we'll take a look at them. And then we're going to say yay or nay. But I will honor anything that enhances the security of the West or contributes to arms talks limitation improvement in Geneva.
I can understand your bit of paper. You'll read the bit of paper and you'll honor the commitment. But as a man who might be Prime Minister of one of the Western nations, albeit a small cog in NATO, surely your own mind must be made up now as to whether or not you would allow the Americans to test an unarmed cruise in our northern territories.
I have no problem with that at all.
Yes, you're saying.
I have no problem with that at all. But I want to see what they're getting us into. You know, you talk about...
You certainly wouldn't announce that you're going to move the Canadian embassy to Tel Aviv in your first press conference.
I would not do that.
No.
Yeah.
Was that one of Joe's big mistakes?
I think in retrospect, that's one that he'd like to...
What was his other
about.
big mistake for which you were extraordinarily upset, no doubt, still?
Well, I think that even Joe would agree that it was a mistake to bring in a budget when you didn't have enough votes to sustain it.
Forgot to count the heads.
I think that all of us would agree that was a bit of a mistake.
Can you count the heads?
I think I can count, Jack.
Do you think that Joe, nice guy though he is, just doesn't have it to be Prime Minister?
Oh, no, I think he's a fine, outstanding person who, if he became leader of the party... You know, Joe resigned. He received more votes in 1983 than he did in 1981.
Right.
But he chose to resign, and which is why we're having this leadership convention. If Joe Clark were to be, or anyone else, were to become leader of the Conservative Party again, he would receive the support of all of us with enthusiasm.
Will you accept the leadership if you get less than 66.9% of the delegates' votes?
I will accept the leadership with considerable alacrity if I get 50% plus one.
And so should Joe.
I can assure you I will.
But so should he.
Well, you'll have to ask him.
But doesn't that make a mockery of the whole business when he had 66.9?
Look, Joe may have had different things to reflect upon. As far as I'm concerned, he got more votes this year than he did in 1981. He chose to resign. I can tell you that at the leadership convention that's coming up in June, give me 50% plus one, and I can assure you I'll accept it.
Both hands. Your questions to Brian Mulroney after the break. Now, telephone callers. We know he's Brian Mulroney. I've already said good morning to him. He has said good morning to me. This is a man who wants Joe Clark's position in the Tory party. Ipso facto, unless the Liberals bring Turner out and outfox them on some issue, he could be the Prime Minister of Canada. Don't waste time with niceties. Say something about him or to him. No good mornings, just at him in a clear, loud voice. Go ahead to Brian Mulroney.
Yes, Mr. Pocklington said that he would have a 20% tax ceiling across the board. What specifics would you have? Second, what do you think Mr. Pocklington's chances are? And third, could you tell me what you think about abortion?
Okay, three questions.
Just to deal with Mr. Pocklington, I have never met Mr. Pocklington, but he's a successful businessman with a handsome record to commend him. You know, I've learned at conservative conventions after 28 years in this party never write anyone off.
He didn't ask you that. He merely said, what do you think of his 20% tax?
No, he asked me what I thought of Mr. Pocklington as well, and I assumed that meant his chances.
Right.
I think his 20% proposal is premature, considerably premature, particularly at this time.
Abortion.
I'm pro-life, but I recognize we live in a pluralistic society and that there are some circumstances where this should be accommodated, but abortion should not be used as a method of birth control.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm very interested as a matter of public record. Does Brian Mulroney have a faith in God, or does he have a religion?
I am, indeed I do, faith in God, and I have a religion, and as do my three children, and as did, by the way, my Irish Catholic mother, Mary Irene O'Shea, upon whose knee I was raised and in whose traditions I was raised.
No, upon whose knee you were dangled.
I was dangled, all right.
Dangled,
But it's a
dangled.
good question, and indeed I do.
And yet upon a knee, you've always got to be dangled.
Dangled, all right.
I'm unilingual, but very good in one language. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning. No good mornings.
Good morning to you, Jack. Mr. Mulroney, you do not favor capital punishment,
He said so.
correct? Why would Olson be allowed to live after 25 years of service in one of the penitentiaries?
That's a specific case, which is a hot one here. I think you've made your position clear on capital punishment, and that would apply to everyone.
That's right.
Go ahead, please.
You're a hammer and a har. No, the Pocklington isn't. When somebody asks you a question, you hem and you ha. I like Pocklington. But the Conservatives in British Columbia are wondering whether or not you'll support Pocklington in the event that you go down the tube.
Rather than hem and haw, sir, I'll tell you point blank that I will support with enthusiasm whomever the Conservative Party selects.
Go ahead, please.
I'm no Pollyanna, but I must say I'm impressed with Mr. Mulroney, and I would like to say that the Conservatives certainly can't do anything wrong in this leadership convention, because each one of the candidates is better than X-Brand, who's rotting the fabric of the nation. But my question is, can you do it?
Can you do the job?
I think that I think the background that I bring to it as someone who was raised in a unionized family and who was educated himself and acquired a reputation as a lawyer and as a royal commissioner cleaning up the crime in the construction industry in the province of Quebec, and was called upon to take a company in very serious condition to run it effectively. When I became president of the Iron Ore Company, it had been stopped 59 times in the previous 9 years by work stoppages of all kinds. We've increased employee income. We've started to pay profits and dividends. We have not lost 1 minute's production because of work stoppages of any kind. And I think that today, with the items that I've been discussing with Jack, yes, ma'am, I think I can do something for Canada to bring us together.
X-Brand rotting the fabric is, of course, the Liberals. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Mulroney,
yeah.
Your conciliatory and pragmatist attitude of doing whatever the party desires lacks the leadership qualities that we need in a man who is decisive and firmly says what he means and means what he says. I think I'll stay with the dog that bit me, because it's the dog that I know best since he grew up in my neighborhood. I mean, I'm voting, I'd rather cast my ballot for the so-called red Tory, Joe Clark, than take a chance on a possible pink Tory. And I'm sure the Quebec delegation will likewise do the same with their candidate, and the Toronto-Rosedale district will likewise do the same with their candidates, and so on and so on. And in the end, we're likely going to wind up with a leader who won by a narrow 2% popularity margin over all the other 11 candidates.
Not a bad point, that, the 2%, you know, it seems funny.
It's a good point, and he mentioned a number of candidates. Every candidate in the race is going to get, I think, a nice and good support across the country. Now, that's important.
Going back to the last convention, when Joe was chosen originally, it seemed to me that the tradition in the Tory party is to run even if you're not going to be leader, so you can build up a power base to get an appropriate cabinet position. That is the tactics of some of the lesser candidates, is it not?
I think some people perhaps look at it that way, but I think most people in the race genuinely believe they've got a major contribution to make, and that's why they're ready to go through this.
But you're
experience.
going for broke this time.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Oh, I forgot to ask you. Not having a seat in the party, if you lose the leadership, what then happens to Brian Mulroney? If you don't beat Clark or whomsoever, what then does Mulroney do? You've got to answer that question.
I'm going to run in the next election.
You will, regardless, run in the next election.
And support whomever is elected.
Funny noise. Go ahead from Lady Smith.
Yes, could I have a list, please, for Mr. Mulroney of the candidates running, starting with the senior or the most strongest down to the weakest? And question 2, would he tell me how many ballots would it go at the leadership convention before a leader is emerged?
Okay. You want to list them all off?
No, I
don't think so.
I should tell you that the delegate selection process under the convention rules doesn't begin until next Friday night. And so as we speak, no delegates have been chosen, and they'll be chosen from Friday to May 1. And that's when the vast bulk of the delegates will be selected. I think some people have an idea of who the quote-unquote leading candidates are, but your guess is as good as mine, sir, as to how it's going to come out and on what ballot.
Yeah, leading candidates obviously are Mulroney, Clark, Crosby, Lesser Crombie, and then there's the odds and sods. Blakey and Gamble and Uncle Tom Copley. I can't remember all the names. Another segment of phone calls with Brian Mulroney, and you're going to meet a mystery guest on this segment after the break. We've now been joined by Mrs. Mulroney, and I'm going to embarrass her quite considerably. Your first name is Mila.
Yes.
What is your maiden name?
Pivnichki.
Say it again.
Pivnichki.
Pivnichki.
Yes.
As it sounds.
As it sounds.
Is that Hungarian, Czechoslovakian?
Yugoslav.
Yugoslavian?
Yes.
How long have you been married to John?
To John.
To Brian.
I'm getting a little jumpy here, Jack.
It'll be 10 years in May.
And you've how many children?
We have 3.
3. How old?
Caroline's going to be 9. Benedict just turned 7. And we have a 4-year-old. Soon to be 4-year-old.
Are you a public kind of wife, or are you a private kind of wife? You know, there are public figures' wives and there are private public figures' wives. What are you?
Well, up to now, I've been a private kind of wife. Soon to be a public kind of wife.
As a matter of fact, I think your presence kind of enhances the candidate, if he doesn't mind us saying so. Mila, right?
Thank you.
Okay, Mila. Will you just sit there while the old man takes some calls?
For sure.
Where are we? Oliver. Go ahead from Oliver, BC to Brian Mulroney.
Yes, I have 3 questions. First of all, would he do the same thing the Liberal government did with the Auditor General? Didn't know how many companies they had. The second is, what do you do about capital gains? And the third, how is he going to implement free enterprise? And I'll hang up and listen to him on the TV.
Thank you. I think you've done the implementation of free enterprise, broadly speaking. Did you read the last Auditor General's report?
I did indeed. I read each one. And for example, before he left office, the last Auditor General, Jim McDonnell, issued a report in which he said effectively the control over the government, the expenditures of the government of Canada has been absolutely lost.
Correct.
But let's just take a small illustration. What would happen if a simple directive were issued saying that Crown corporations in Canada, the secret manner in which you raise and spend money, as you know, Crown corporations in Canada are going to do what all of us do. They're going to bring in a bottom line. They're going to live within it, or else. For openers, that is a pretty major
zero-based budgeting for Crown corporations.
Change in attitude.
What about capital gains?
Secondly, on this vital question, Jack, process of accountability to Parliament by Crown corporations and government itself. We have to beef up the opposition's capacity to deal with these billion-dollar figures. Each member of Parliament should be provided with the necessary expertise and through special Commons committees where you'll deal, say, 1 year. Let's take a real look at Air Canada. Let's take a real look at Mr. Jack Horner's CNR with the million-dollar overruns and so on. Let's go through it and analyze it the way the shareholders of the Iron Ore Company of Canada hold me accountable at the end of each year. Let us impose accountability on the people who spend the public's money. And you're going to find that once you insist upon the simple principle of accountability, there is going to be a revolution in thinking in Ottawa. What the boys think now? All right, I'm running X Crown Corporation. I'm sitting here in this big office having a wonderful time. So what if I overrun by a couple of million or 20 or 30 million or 50 million? It's only money. The boys are they got a printing press in the basement, they're going to run off some more. It is the attitude that must be changed in Ottawa, and I propose to change it by introducing the same principles by which you and I must live our lives, and every family out there. We've got to live within our means, and we can't live on borrowed time and borrowed money. We must do what every family in Canada is doing, live within our means.
Even if the Liberals are in the opposition, you'll give them the machinery to get after it.
I will indeed. I think it's important that the opposition parties be given this, to look at the expenditures of public funds.
Capital gain.
capital gains is, the way it's structured presently, inhibits the creative impulses of people who want to create jobs and take risks.
You would like to wipe out capital gains?
I want to take a real good look at it.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, you may be unilingual and Mr. Mulroney may be bilingual, but I'm arithmetical. And the figures that he's given in terms of the benefits of $10 million to 165 permanent and 400 part-time is quite commendable. But on the basis of $250,000 in dividends...
$250 million.
How much was that?
$250 million.
$250 million in dividends. That's a pretty small percentage of the dividends. So I don't think that's a fair return, i.e., he shouldn't be too proud of that decision.
Okay, Shefferville decision.
Yeah, that's a good point, except that you have to look at it in perspective. The dividends to which you refer were the first dividends that this company had paid its shareholders in 9 years. And when you prorate the dividends, as you must, you get a return on average of 4.7%, which is substantially less than inflation and is a lot less than you get by putting it in the bank. The returns, the yield was hardly abusive, and the amount of money that was given to our employees was done fairly, and as was said, was the most generous settlement ever seen.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to know one thing. If Mulroney was leading a government and the crimes which seem to be increasing in Canada, couldn't they be stopped? Is there any reason why they couldn't pass a law that any person convicted of a crime would lose their civil rights during the length of their imprisonment and sentence?
We don't want to go into the whole thing of prison reform. Prisoners do lose some civil rights now.
But I think I can give you perhaps a different kind of answer to that, Jack. In 1974, when crime and violence spread across the province of Quebec, where the James Bay work site is burned down, where people carried guns, where people's legs were broken, shot at, and I was a member of the Royal Commission dealing with those issues. And I sat there as a Royal Commissioner for 14 months with some of the great criminals and bandits and elements of corruption in the province of Quebec sitting right where you are in the witness box. And we dealt head-on with these elements of corruption that were distorting the moral values of an entire society. And I can tell you today that we brought in 132 legislative enactments that were passed by the National Assembly of the province of Quebec. And since the 1st of May, 1975, in this vast construction industry in the province of Quebec, a $10 billion a year industry, with thousands and thousands and thousands of people, there hasn't been a peep out of them since. We were interested in protecting the rights of the ordinary worker against corruption coming from all sides and abuse and criminality. And we weeded it out. We put the key guys in the slammer, and now there's peace on the construction sites. And I think that's an approach that we could adopt with some profit nationally.
Go ahead, please. What are you?
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Mulroney for giving us the courtesy of coming out here to Vancouver and showing us that we are the power base for the Conservative Party, and a pretty shrewd political move, I would say, on his part. I would also like to say that he has quite a bit to overcome in Western Canada in the fact that an awful lot of people were very upset about the dumping of Joe Clark by the local Conservative MPs, and if those people stand for office again, that they might have a pretty hard fight. Because feelings did run pretty high. The next thing I would like to say, how much of the old budget are you going to incorporate should you become government? I'm thinking particularly of the mortgage deductibility.
Okay, mortgage deductibility is our only question.
That was the issue on which the Conservative Party was elected in by-elections in '78, the general election in 1979, and it was never brought in. I think that the great productive middle class of this society deserves a break, and that was appropriate at the time. I'm going to take a real hard look at that again, and that's the kind of thing that I want to do for the people who work so hard and get so little in return.
How many speeches will you make between now and the 12th? Is it 12th of June?
11th of June.
11th of June.
How many speeches?
How many speeches?
Oh, probably quite a few, Jack, because it's a big country, and I'm trying to see the delegates basically on a one-on-one basis, and they have questions. They want to look all the candidates over because it's a big decision. We're going to get one more kick at the can in getting rid of these grits. And what I want to do is take a crowbar and go down there and get Trudeau out of that swimming pool. Because that's the only way that British Columbia's voice is going to be heard in Ottawa, if we can break the stranglehold that they have developed on the national government, and that's what I propose to do.
My thanks to the lantern-jawed, I don't like all these cheap cracks, but he does have a big jaw. The lantern-jawed Brian Mulroney, contender for the leadership of the Conservative Party, and to his charming wife, Mila. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
I'll see you at the convention in
See you at the
Ottawa.
convention.
I'll be there, nagging you. After the break, I'll be back. Well, the candidate's gone. He wasn't mad. Had to push him in a couple of questions. Oh, you're right in front of my camera. So what do we do now? We have an inquest for 20 minutes, I suppose. Oh, dear. Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
Yes. Mr. Mulroney?
Mr. Mulroney, I've got feedback and everything. Mr. Mulroney has just left the station.
Well, what do you do? I've been holding for nearly 10 minutes.
Well, I'm terribly sorry about that, ma'am. I've been here for an hour and 15 minutes, and I tried to get you on, but apparently you didn't come up in time. So what do you want to say to me, if anything?
Well, doesn't make any difference.
Okay. There's nothing funny about these kind of things. This is deadly serious. Woman's offended. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
That's you, sir.
Yes, I'm calling about Mulroney.
He just left.
Oh, he's gone, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Bye. I'm as popular as a skunk at a garden party this morning. Go ahead, please. Hello. We got no spare ENG. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, that's you.
Okay, could you tell me, please, you said that Mr. Mulroney broadly answered the question about what sort of incentives he's going to be providing the private sector, like he's going to get our motor started. What did you get out of that? Did you hear that he's got any absolute specifics as to what he's going to do for us?
No, he's going to restrict the Patronage indicated in their confiscatory policies in relation to new oil finds in Canada. He's going to give a tax break to small business. He's going to have a good hard look at capital gain. He's going to put Crown corporations on what I interpreted as zero budgeting. He was not specific on anything about, oh yes, he would like to look at the price of natural gas. But as usual, he was not particularly specific, except that the ex-brand party presently in power, and this is a caller's view, he agrees that they're rotting the fabric of the country.
Not quite as specific as Mr. Parklington was, that's for sure.
No, Parklington's fairly simple-minded in these issues and just says...
Also, I wonder what he plans to do with all of the prisoners that are going to be left over from the 25 years non-reviewed that he's going to be having them, rather than putting the premeditated murderers to death like Mr. Parklington said.
Well, he's quite straightforward in that, too. He says mandatory 25 years for premeditated murder, no parole prior to 25 years, and that is the classic tradition of the majority of the members of the House of Commons, although it is not the position, I believe, of the majority of ordinary Canadians.
Thanks for the time, Mr. Webster.
That's an issue on which you've got to make up your own mind and decide for whom to vote. Where am I going? Go ahead, please.
Oh, Mr. Webster?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Webster?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I would have liked to have asked Mr. Mulroney what he planned on doing about capital punishment, and in particular about the case of, I won't even call him Mr., I'll call him Olson.
We decided never to mention his name again, and he made it perfectly clear that even in the Olson case, by reference, he would go for the 25 years no parole. So that's his
Then he
position.
gets out and does it all over again.
Well, that's his position on capital punishment. I can't give you any better than that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack?
Yes.
I was calling about the alienation that you were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Mulroney said that 75% or 75 out of 102 seats are in Quebec.
He said that there are 102 seats in which the French-Canadian vote composes at least 10%, and that he plans to capture as many of these seats as he can. He says that's the one which will create a national government, a number of those seats under Tory leadership, allied with seats that he's confident they can hold in the West, will put a whole new slant on the affairs of the country and will ipso facto remove the alienation. I didn't quite get that point also clearly, all that clearly myself. I don't know why that by itself should cure alienation. Any new government might cure alienation.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking myself.
Providing, of course, that the Liberals don't hold on to Quebec as a matter of tradition. Because if the Liberals automatically get the 75 seats in Quebec and a few other seats with the preponderance of French-Canadian voters, they control the country regardless.
Yes, that's what I was thinking myself. Wouldn't one way to solve that would be to equal it out through the provinces?
Can't do that. You can only, it's rep by pop. You can only do that on Senate seats. But you and I were both slightly mystified by the same point. Free for all with Webster after the break. It's always a bit of an anticlimax after a major candidate goes and leaves me holding the bag or holding the fort. Go ahead from Powell River.
Yes, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
Do you think Mr. Mulroney is as honest and wholesome as he sounds?
Oh, I'm not going to throw any nasturtiums. Of course he is. He says he'll follow all the rules on campaign donations. And he's obviously a good candidate. I mean, it will sure brighten up the Tory convention. He ran third the last time. Remember, first was Clark, second was Wagner, as I recall, and the third was Mulroney. And then there were people like St. Stevens in there who wouldn't throw their votes to Flora MacDonald. And it was a dog's breakfast. And it's been said 1,000 times that Joe got the leadership by happenstance. The leadership delegates were throwing their votes to those whom they thought was least troublesome to them. So they finished up in Joe's hands. But anything can happen. I, of course, have a basic aversion to delegate conventions to pick a prime minister anyway. And I know this sounds very snotty, but I think the Prime Minister of Canada should be picked in the traditional manner from those elected to the House of Commons. Because they're not all stupid, the MPs, you know. And that prevents this business of the little old ladies in running shoes or the little political flacks or those who get their fares paid to Ottawa voting the way they're told to vote. I'd rather see it picked from the House of Commons. And the beauty of that is that if you pick a stinker from the House of Commons by the MPs and he goes sour, the caucus just meets and says to the Prime Minister, get the hell out. You've lost our confidence. Joe Blow is going to take your job. So recommend to the Governor-General. Because once you've elected the MPs, they have the power. Okay. Victoria.
Yes, this isn't to do with politics, but it is something you talked about. Surely a baby is dandled on its mother's knee, not dangled.
Did I say dangled?
You said dangled.
It's dandled.
Dandled.
D-A-N-D-L-E-D.
That's right.
You smart aleck.
Okay, then.
Which school did you go to in Glasgow?
I didn't. I grew up in the north of Ireland.
Oh, my God. No comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Oh, I thought you was Scotch. Oh, jeez. My ethnic antenna is not working this morning. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes.
I was born and brought up in Quebec, and I know Mr. Mulroney has a very soft-spoken and disarming manner, but he's a very ruthless opportunist. what I would have liked to have asked him, when he was president of Iron Ore and it folded, how he managed to get the brass out of that with a good amount of money.
I asked him that.
And?
He said they got 4.7% in dividends averaged back over the profits of the company. And that he gave 10 million extra contract, further than the contract needed, and even the Steelworkers Union complimented him on his settlement. That's what he said.
Huh? Yeah, they seem to get those ones out before it came out that Iron Ore, a big place like that, was actually folding. But he is a ruthless opportunist, and he will walk on whoever it's necessary to walk on.
Maybe that's what we need.
Well, I don't know.
He certainly
did. Somebody honest too, you know.
What did you think of his job in the Cleach Commission?
Well, I didn't think too much of it either.
Okay, ma'am, we'll put you down as doubtful. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, how are you doing this morning?
Not bad. I enjoyed the interview with Mulroney.
I kind of been a little bit disillusioned. I was expecting a man to come on there that everybody's touted as being the next leader, and I'm a conservative, and if he's the next leader, I think I won't vote. I want somebody that's going to be a leader, a fighter, more of a decisive personality, somebody that is going to do. I think Clark is in trouble because he's too wishy-washy. This guy's worse than the other one was.
Okay, who would you pick?
I would say Crosby or Pocklington. At least they can make up their mind on something. This guy can't seem to do anything.
Pocklington?
Okay?
Okay, bye, much obliged. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello?
Hello. That's you. That's you.
Hello?
Hello, are you there? Okay, well, speak up when I say go ahead.
Jack, I was in the Yellowhead when Clark was the MP there.
Yeah?
And he was very indecisive of many things. He did a survey on capital punishment. 83% of the riding voted.
All right, who do you prefer as between Crombie, Crosby, Clark, and Mulroney? Who's your choice? He's got a problem this morning, that fella. Will you stand out of the way, Fred? I can't see much. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack. How you doing?
Fair to poor.
Oh, I see.
One question. Did you like Mulroney or did you not like him?
I liked him.
Okay. Do you prefer him to Clark or not?
I won't say.
Oh, you're full of instant decision.
No, listen.
You've got 4 seconds.
I just wanted to get out, Jack, that I heard that he took the economy flight over when he came to Vancouver. And
That's
nice
correct.
of
He
him,
took the economy flight. I accused him of a little bit of window dressing and that, but he did fly economy to Vancouver and will doubtless be flying economy across the country. I'll be back after the break. Couple of good things on tomorrow morning. Doing a piece with Dr. Michael Livingston on back problems. I'm getting old, you see. And we're going to do a serious piece with Joe Woods, a very well-known Vancouver lawyer, on the effects of the amendments to the laws as applied to rape. At 9 a.m. precisely. Brian Mulroney with Webster on check at midnight. Joe Woods, Vancouver lawyer, on the effect of the new rape laws at 9 a.m. precisely.
One more time.
Correct. What the new rape laws mean tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.